see if this is going. All right, so we got level. Sweet. So welcome. Wanted to do a special stream tonight just to kind of go behind the scenes of High Hopes with Gina, Livia. We both, myself, Jake, and Gina, were super pleased with the reception on this track. Definitely for Otherwise Fine, a bit of a departure from some of the previous releases. Definitely something a little more chilled out in the verses. But yeah, stoked on the reception of it, and decided to do a special stripped version. So that's coming out Friday. Pre-save links are in the chats. So please go pre-save it. That'd be awesome. I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, but it'd be really cool if you guys check that out. And I wanted to dive into the Ableton project, kind of talk about how this collab came to be, and then if you guys had any questions, fire them off. So first things first, this track started probably a year and a half ago now, as just an instrumental demo. So this is something that I kind of wrote quickly, the chords and the melody one afternoon, and kind of built out this skeleton. So the chords and the melody were there, this idea of kind of a big drop section seemingly out of nowhere, and then rinse repeat. That was all there, but it was quite bare. It was clear that it needed a vocal, it needed to be filled out, and that demo just sat on the hard drive for, I want to say, the better part of 6 months. And then I forget when about, but after In Transit was released, Gina actually reached out, and we started chatting, and I was sending over demos. And normally I don't like to send over anything that's kind of unfinished. Like to try to prefer to send over polished demos that people can actually hear and then decide if they want to work on that or not. But I like the vibe with Gina, and I decided, you know what, this is kind of something that I think she would do really well on. So I sent it over, and luckily she sent back a scratch vocal, I think that afternoon. It was super, super quick, and it was kind of off to the races from there. Her vocals are absolutely incredible on this record, and it's exactly what it needed. So jumping into it, the track itself is pretty basic. Going from that original demo to the final version mostly was a lot of work with Gina's vocals on the kind of the drop section. So the piano itself barely changed from the demo, just kind of a little bit of arrangement differences. But in terms of the chords and the melody, it's about the same. Now, unfortunately, I had to stem out the entirety of the track in order to even have a fighting chance of doing a stream. So the CPU is probably going to spike. If there's some pops and glitches, definitely let me know. But I tested this out earlier, so hopefully it's good. Also, let me know if my my mic level to track level is good, because I set that before in OBS and it turned it off pre-stream, so that might be out of whack. But yeah, so this is the stem down version of the piano. So this is essentially what I sent off to Gina before she came back with the vocals. So the piano itself is pretty simple. I run a layered piano of the Spitfire Labs, which is a free piano but sounds incredible, with a contact library. That with a little bit of EQ and compression, even on the stems, there's just a sidechain. Yeah, there you have it. That's the piano. For the rest of the kind of lead up to the drop, there's a lot of moments where there's some kind of pads or there's some sparkles or something to fill out the space. A lot of that kind of came afterwards, just to, again, fill out the space and provide some sort of build. So the track does kind of explode at the drop, which was intentional, but you still kind of have to have some lead up to it. So some of that is some kind of background vocal effects and vocal chops. So fun fact, these vocal chops here, as well as on the drop, are actually not Gina's vocal. I will reserve saying where they're from. But yeah, so some of these actually were on the initial demo, but they were much more prominent and they were slightly altered. And I decided to keep them in there at a low level, just again to kind of fill out some space in the drop on the final version. But yeah, those vocal chops, again, in terms of the stems, there's not a ton of processing to look at. I think just a little bit of surgical EQ. But the chops themselves are mostly just pitched with Little Altar Boy, EQ, Valhalla, compression, and then maybe some OTT. And then it's just a matter of kind of finding the pattern and then pitching accordingly. So the vocal chops on those weren't anything kind of complicated. The next element in the track is, again, kind of filler, which I can group together, is this kind of effects group and the guitar. So again, these were added to kind of drive the track to that first drop. And then carry that throughout the drop. But in the context of the mix, they're pretty low. But if you take it out, it kind of, the track misses it. So I'm gonna leave Gina's vocals to last, just because I think that's the most important part of the track. So the next thing to kind of dive into would be the synths and the bass. So for the verses, there's an ARP, which is essentially just a basic init serum patch with some filter cutoff happening quickly with a reverb behind it, and then some saturation on the reverb. So that's how you kind of get like the metallic feel. But the goal here was really to leave Gina's vocals the star. So even on the bass, mostly just some sub to kind of fill out the frequency spectrum, with the synth filling out the high end, also the stereo field, while again trying to stay out of the way of the vocal. On the drop itself, most of the pumping is actually coming from the side chain. So there's a couple different side chains you'll see. The big one is from the kick, obviously, but also a pretty heavy side chain from the snare, just to kind of get that 2/4 from the kick snare pattern. Additionally, on the entire synth group, before I stemmed it out, and I probably should have removed it, there's also an LFO tool there to really kind of accentuate the pumping of the entire track. the last thing to kind of touch on before getting into the vocals is there's actually, and again, any otherwise fine track, if you go under the hood, you will find some sort of orchestral grouping of tracks. So here on the build, there's some horn stabs, which is kind of funny because normally I like to do my best to get realistic sounding orchestral sections, but this section in solo sounds super synthetic to me and super digital, and it's something I didn't really notice until breaking down the track for the stream, because in the context of the mix, it's super low. So you don't really notice that it kind of sounds like something out of a synth patch for some brass. Then leading to the last drop, big string swells, and again pumping hard from the side chain. So without the side chain, there's no automation on them whatsoever. Just held notes. But with the big old side chain, you get that groove. And the strings really do a lot to add energy to the last drop, and make it really thick. So that's essentially the supporting elements of the entire track. There's two separate kicks. One's mixed super low, just to kind of, again, give some rhythm to the breaks. So the biggest thing with this track was trying to find a way to link the verses with the drop. So the drop itself obviously is cut a lot of energy behind it, and the verses are quite stripped down. So getting from A to B with having this kind of moment where it switches required a little bit of heavy lifting from very, very small elements. So removing those elements makes a big difference, even if by themselves you don't really notice them. Again, like that guitar. So in the build, so that's without the guitar and kick. So two very small elements that do a lot to push the track forward into the drop. So I'm gonna talk about Gina's vocals now. So getting these vocals from Gina was a great day because they sounded fantastic right off the bat. So there wasn't a ton of processing that needed to be done. I did go through and melodyne them real quick, but that took, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 minutes just because it didn't need any help. That was just more kind of as a fail-safe to go through. In terms of comping and all of that, so luckily Gina sent over the final kind of center, harms, left, right stem, so didn't have to do any comping. And then just did a bit of work kind of gain staging. So the initial stems that I got were very dynamic, and I think listening to the track, it's kind of easy to see how that is. So did a little bit of work gain staging. So I don't know where the initial stems are, but if I were to pull them up, you'd see these were super thick, and then the verses were super thin. So just a little bit of work to kind of level out everything, so that the compressors don't need to work as hard. But then on the vocals themselves, so here I didn't stem them out. it's just a little bit of EQ, some compression, some de-essing. I did throw a bit of auto-tune. So for anyone wondering, this is a really cool plugin that lets you use VST3 in Ableton. I don't know how else to get VST3 to work, but this is really handy. So I'm using a VST3 version of auto-tune. And so, yeah, so that's just like a little bit of auto-tune, but that's more so for a timbre. Auto-tune gives it this kind of pop polish. So retunes being super low, really not doing any work other than just to kind of give it this slight brightness that I find helps a lot. And then on the main vocal, I'm running a little bit of wider on CLA vocals, and then a little bit of micro shift just to do a stereo spread of the vocal, so that the main vocal has some stereo element.
But we lost now, like a wolf I shot. The hurting gets too loud. Well, I still feel numb.
I have some Butch Vig. This plugin's really awesome for vocals.
What the hell have I
just adding a little bit of top end on that air, putting back in some of the low mids that I'd scooped out in the first pass, doing a little bit more de-essing because this track has a lot of S's in it. I mean, there's like 7. But yeah, this kind of just gives the track a little bit more, bite. A little bit of compression, compressing the entire group of the harmonies and the backings and all that together. Some gain going through, again, leveling off. So one big thing is I don't like to do, or I try not to over compress, because in the past I've been guilty of super over compressing vocals. So doing some gain staging instead kind of allows the sections to remain dynamic, but still fit into the mix as they should, without needing to over compress or kind of push up elements otherwise. A little bit of surgical EQ, some more surgical EQ, super light compression, some saturation on the drop just to kind of push the track forward in the drop, some parallel compression, and then one little last bit of de-essing. I think the hardest part of this track was just kind of controlling the S's, since I wanted the vocal to be super far forward, but there's so many S's in the lyrics. Oops, let me just toss this up here. So for the harmonies and the doubles, again, barely any work to these, kind of the same process of the main vocal.
The hurting gets too loud. Oh, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done?
And if I turn off the sends,
oh, what the hell have I done?
So the harmonies here are a low harm, which is pitched down with a little alter boy, and then compressed to shit with some OTT, and then a high harm that I did a hard tune on. So that was to kind of get like a robotic effect. And again, the slight pitch variation between the two kind of provided some vibrato to the overall vocal, which I thought was a cool effect. In terms of the effect itself, so yeah, so this is the drop vocal.
Oh, what the hell have I done?
without the
Oh,
sends.
what the hell have I done?
So the sends are doing some heavy lifting on the drop. So overall on the vocal group, there's a little bit of doubler, just again to widen the vocal the slightest bit. There's some room reverb, a plate reverb. There's a piano reverb to put the background vocals into the same space as the piano. Same with the chamber. And then there's some delay, including a slapback. There's a vocoder section. So during the, where is it? I believe during the drop, sorry. I wanted, again, to have it kind of be a little more impactful with energy. So decided to toss on a vocoder in there to kind of fill out the synth aspect of it. Since the synths themselves on the drop are quite light, I wanted to have some more kind of mid and low mid. So with the vocoder, I need to solo the vocal for that. It kind of accomplished adding an extra synth layer, but still coming just from the vocal to keep, again, the vocal the focus. So the main kind of heavy lifting of that drop comes from this one send. Which is basically just a massive reverb with some OTT and then some EQ. But the key here is that I'm sending the entire group there, so it's also getting those kind of low harms and high harms together. And then that's mixed, obviously, in with the entire group.
Oh, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Yeah, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell?
So that aspect of the track is probably what took the most. So if I go into kind of my my folder here of tracks, and I do High Hopes. So I went through and deleted a lot of them. Okay, so yeah, this is not even close to a representative of how many different versions of this there were. I would easily say there's probably about 20 different versions that were mostly a lot of incremental changes of the level of vocal to kind of effect on the drop, just trying to get that to balance well. I don't even know, looking at the stream, I think I forget if I had to go to an earlier version of the project where it may have been slightly different. And then obviously in the master, there's a bit of extra compression there, which affects the level between the two. But the one thing I did add was an extra layer to all of this just on the drop with processing that was specific in order to kind of give some weight back to the main vocal. So there's a ton of saturation on this. It's EQ'd just to kind of focus on the mids of the vocal range. So it's super subtle.
Oh, what the hell have I done? Yeah, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done?
But it added a lot back to the track and kind of just gave it that extra little bit that the main vocal needed, because the balancing act was the epicness, if you will, of the big reverb and the OTT, but the strength of the main vocal. So between the sends and the different versions, that was kind of like the last piece of the puzzle to make it work. And then the rest of the vocal is pretty straightforward, same processing. There's a really nice moment. So yeah, going through, there's these couple little ad-libs that Gina included when she sent over that were just super impactful. So yeah, there's a couple little moments here where those ad-libs come in. And I think those really, really drive the track forward and kind of are the cherry on top. But altogether, that is High Hopes. I guess I didn't go over the drums. The drums are pretty simple. Mostly just kind of a kick snare pattern. There's a kind of a foley loop just to provide some texture so it's not so straightforward. Adds a little bit of organicness to it. There is a ton of layering on the snare. And another thing that was kind of one of those last little elements that took several versions to dial in was the inclusion of a second snare. So originally the demo, and up until probably maybe a few weeks before we submitted this for release, actually, to be honest, it may have been even up until the last week of submission to release. So that's the original. So you can barely hear the difference there. And then there's an automation, so it comes up 4 dB in the second verse, second drop. Versus so super subtle, but these are kind of the details that take the longest to decide on when finishing up a track. So in the context of the mix, so yeah, super splashy versus tight. Or I shouldn't say super splashy because it is pretty subtle. But yeah, so the drums themselves are kind of straightforward. A little bit of swing to the hat pattern and the kick snare. So yeah, the track itself, I think, is a really good example of some solid ingredients coming together to make something that's better than the sum of their parts. And then obviously Gina's vocal is just incredible. So that's about the entirety of the track. Not sure if anyone had any questions about the production, about working with Gina, which was fantastic. But that about covers it. So for the stripped release, so this is an example of the stripped release kind of being a no-brainer. There's a ton of otherwise fine releases that I've definitely played around with the idea of doing kind of a piano release or an orchestral release or something like that. That's something I'm definitely a huge fan of. I think it comes across in the music sometimes, certainly with a lot of the kind of string brass, kind of spizzicato or however you say it, elements of certain tracks. But with this one, it was a no-brainer. So that's what's coming out on Friday. If you guys haven't already, grab the pre-save. It is in the chat. Helps out a ton. Really would appreciate it. It's definitely something different. But I mean, High Hopes was definitely something different, and everyone seemed to really like it, which was awesome. So yeah, I will play it through.
Now my heart hurts when I think about us. Like it hits you from a dark hole, what you buried in your past. Never would I have thought that we end up without love. Cause in my dreams I build a tree house where you can touch the stars. But we lost now, like a wolf I shout. The hurting gets too loud, but I still feel numb. Oh, what the hell have I done to be treated like the dumb one? And I'm sorry for my hit and run. They never came easy. Those high hopes took a lot from this. Whatever we thought we missed, a cool sun was raised within and broke our walls so freely. Oh, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Yeah, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Yeah, what the hell have I done? Yeah, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Now when I see your face, the one thing that hurts the most is that we're always gonna come back to the place where we lost our hope. Even though we lost now, our love will never fall out. At least that's what I talk about when everything feels so numb. Those high hopes took a lot from this. Whatever we thought we missed, a cool sun was raised within and broke our walls so freely. Oh, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Yeah, what have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have I done? Yeah, what the hell have I done? Yeah, what the hell have I done? Oh, what the hell have
All right, so that is High Hopes. That is the breakdown. Stripped version coming out Friday. Pre-save links are in the chat. If anyone had any last minute questions, feel free to shoot them over on Twitter. Yeah, happy to dive back into this at any point. All right, cool. Hope that was somewhat enjoyable or educational, useful, whatever. Appreciate everyone for stopping by, and look forward to Friday so we can all bump this together. All right, that's it for me. Cheers.